Know if that's the ticket.
It's recording.
Ideal.
So
Perfect.
I'll put it on pause.
Thank you. I'll multitask and keep my eye on the waiting room as well. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to all the members that made it. Thank you to all the public that's made it. Just a few quick housekeeping points. In the event that we do get Zoom bombed, I sincerely hope we do not. I will halt the meeting and just ask everyone to leave the meeting. And then everyone please resume the meeting in about 5 minutes, take a breather, grab a glass of water, click on the same meeting link that you have. I really hope that that does not happen during this meeting. If everyone could just mute yourself, you're given the controls to mute and unmute, but just for the effective running of the meeting, if you don't mind to mute yourself, there will be a period for public comment at the end of the meeting. And during the course of the presentation, if anyone on the committee wishes to interrupt me, ask questions, add input or feedback, please by all means do so. That's definitely just open dialogue is really important. So feel free to cut me off. I am multitasking on Zoom, so if I take a second to see you, just let me know. Chat is enabled if you have a question that you want answered at the end, or if you want to save it for public comment, chat will go directly to me. So if you do want to just be recognized or want to remember a question during the course of the presentation, feel free to use it for that purposes. The presentation will be made available online. And other than that, just really quickly, this is our second meeting. So, and so just so everyone knows, there'll be public comment at the end of the meeting. So this is our second meeting of the Cornwall Housing Affordable Housing Plan Committee. Our first meeting, just to recap really quickly, we have a lot to go over today. We discussed the state statute requirements for coming up with an affordable housing plan. That's under the new statute 830J, not to be confused with 830G. An affordable housing plan is now a mandate by the state that we develop one and adopt one by July of 2020 as a town, and all towns within the state of Connecticut are required to do so. That's on a 5-year cycle. So every 5 years, we'll revisit that plan and amend it and adopt it. So that was what was discussed during the first meeting. During the first meeting, we also discussed some of the guidelines of what will go into the plan. The state in December of 2020 put out their guidelines of what needs to go in an affordable housing plan, but there really is flexibility built around us tailoring a plan that really fits the needs of Cornwall and fits what housing is appropriate in the town. So that said, what I will do is I will share my screen and I'll actually access the presentation from the webpage. So right now, as a container for all of our project materials, because there'll be a lot of materials that are either articles being shared or PowerPoint slides that I prepare or notes that I take, I'm just putting them into the COGS website as a container for all that information on top of what's being posted to the town's website for FOI purposes and to get out all those meetings. So this is accessed from the homepage. If you click on Cornwall, it will bring us right to all of the materials. I do plan to post any letters. I do need to make an amendment to a few things. And then we have some data that has been added to the webpage as well, but we'll be accessing this presentation today from our data assessment. So that said, I'll jump right in. So yeah, let me just make sure I covered all the housekeeping things. I think we're good on that, but we have a lot to cover today. So just jumping right in, I want to recap and go back to the housing goals. We touched upon the Plan of Conservation and Development during last meeting. The Plan of Conservation and Development in Cornwall was recently adopted in January of 2020. So that's really a nice baseline for us when we're thinking through housing strategy, housing plans for the town to really go back to the plan of conservation and development that was recently adopted and use that as a tool to set a guiding light of where we could potentially go with our affordable housing plan. These goals are what was a product of a long planning process with developing and then finalizing the plan of conservation and development. So that said, that these are taken verbatim from the plan of conservation and development, and that affordable housing plan can definitely add some meat to the bones of what the plan of conservation and development has laid out as far as goals go, and then really drill down on strategies. To revisit the affordable housing plan's requirements, it's required by Department of Housing that we do propose, sorry, I just have to let someone in, that we do propose affordable housing that can qualify for the state statute, the state definition of affordable housing, but also to tackle other housing strategies to increase housing supply in town. So that's kind of my recap before we get into today. So the reason why we're touching upon data is really to paint the picture of the demographic information of what we have, the housing information of what we have in the town, to really start as our baseline for where we're going with the potential housing strategies that we might be proposing. So at any course of this presentation, if I am going too fast, if you want to revisit any data point, just as a little aside, the data is taken from the census. So those most recent numbers were 2014 to 2018, which might seem really dated, especially in light of the COVID situation. So some of the slides that I'm bringing up, the numbers might seem old, a little antiquated, maybe not quite so right. So that's definitely something that we should look at when we're discussing the plan and really developing our strategies, are not only anecdotal evidence from what's going on in town, but also keeping in light how the COVID pandemic has truly shaped the economy and some of just these data points that don't take into consideration the global pandemic. So that's sort of my disclaimer before jumping into all this data. But so where are we? What is sort of our landscape that we're working in? Cornwall's population and much of the region's population has been projected to decline steadily over the years, while simultaneously it has been projected that the aged population, age 65 and above, will grow. So those two things happening at the same time: overall population going down, and then age distribution of the older population going up. That said, the households with children over time, that's kind of been a global trend, a national trend especially, that has been going down, declining. So most of the school districts in the region are projected to have fewer students over the years. The town of Cornwall Plan of Conservation Development did a really great job. Hats off to Anna Tamel, who looked at the data upon writing and preparing the plan of conservation and development to really look at the school age population. So the plan of conservation and development looked at a lot of different data points, which I've adopted to use in this presentation. So the plan really projected that the school age was going to decline by about 31% between now and 2030. And just thinking through all of these data points, again, our current climate, has the global pandemic changed this, or are these trends pretty much on trend with what we project will be happening? And then to think through how this might affect our housing needs and what we'll need long-term for establishing more housing in town and achieving the goals of the plan of conservation and development, and then what we'll eventually arrive at with the affordable housing plan. So the next data point is really about the labor force. Over time, the labor force in the region, and particularly in Cornwall, what we've seen is pretty stagnant. So it's important to consider the labor force is also people that are looking for work. So it's sort of just been, stagnant with labor force versus the overall population. And another interesting data point to touch upon comes from the Cornwall by the numbers that supplemented the plan of conservation and development. And that's that 40% of Cornwall's labor is self-employed. So I make note of that just because that could really paint a conversation around jobs and also people coming into town and the driving forces behind that. So to look at housing, our existing housing, there's over 1,000 units in the town, and a majority of those units are the template of what we see in rural Connecticut towns, which is single family and single lots. And that type of housing actually generally tends to be a more expensive housing type to build, maintain, and to purchase. So about 95% of Cornwall's housing stock is this single family version of housing. And then who's in these homes? So this is a data point that may have surely changed due to some of the diaspora from urban areas into rural areas due to the COVID pandemic. But what the census has recorded is that owner occupation within the town was at about 45%. Vacant was also at about 45%, and then the rented is around 10%. So that's just thinking through the whole housing picture within the town as it stands. And this gets into those numbers a little bit more. So just over time, the trend that was observed was just that those vacant units definitely grew in number. So as the years progressed, more and more houses were used seasonally, recreationally, or occasionally within the town of Cornwall. Another picture of the housing situation is definitely short-term rentals. Rentals are a really important consideration when it comes to the overall picture of housing and what it means for availability. And short-term rentals are often seen as an alternative to hotels. So not so much a housing solution, but definitely a part of the greater housing picture. So every once in a while, I'll just search Airbnbs in regional towns just for my own data points, curiosity. And at this point, I was preparing a presentation back in October, and these were the points that I pulled for Cornwall. So about 6 listings, and those range from about $80 to $642 a night. So it's just interesting to think through rental options, but also rental options like what that's going for and if it's providing a housing solution. Another interesting thing about housing in Cornwall is that it's definitely more so on the age side. So if you look at what this graphic is representing, it's really showing that a large majority, 40% or greater, were built in 1939 or earlier. And in keeping in mind housing costs, I came across some data from Porch, really interesting, that Connecticut is the 3rd most costly state. I knew Connecticut was costly, but never did I think it was the 3rd most costly in terms of home maintenance. And or the average yearly cost is over $17,000. So I knew this was an expensive place to live, but definitely thinking through the whole housing picture, not so much only getting into a house, but then maintaining the house long term. So that said, much of the housing stock in Cornwall is older. And then 2000 current is about 10% of that housing stock. So just thinking through how maintenance is also a picture of the whole housing equation. And then I looked into household composition. So what's making up a household? Over time, we have seen that households are getting smaller. National trend, worldwide trend is just we're having fewer children. Currently, the average household size in Cornwall is 2.25. And then most of the houses actually have more bedrooms. So there's, like asymmetry between the number of bedrooms in a home and potentially the number of people that are occupying them. I was listening to a podcast and they mentioned that I think it was 60 years ago, the average household had 3.5 individuals and the average house size was 900 square feet. Whereas today, the average household is about 2.5 nationwide and the average house is 3,000 square feet. So that's just interesting trend over time. And I did add a slide on jobs just available in town. This is pulled from the Partnership for Strong Communities information. So I'm always interested to see what they put out. They did put out their 2020 housing survey. That's up on the website with all the project materials as well, but they listed the major employers in Cornwall. I think it's really important to think through jobs also on a regional basis. We don't necessarily have to live in the town that we're working, but also just thinking through what is available and at what salary level or what wage level. I listed these types of professionals: teachers, paraprofessional, custodian, just in thinking through housing people that are going to be working in towns. Oftentimes people say workforce housing, just thinking through if the town can support all of the various professionals that are needed in the town. And then another data point is the household median income, which was recorded. Now getting into cost and affordability. So cost burden households, very typically it said that those that are renting tend to be more cost burden than homeowners. That's just information that was pulled from the Partnership for Strong Communities. And by definition, this cost burden concept is if you pay more than 30% of your income on housing. So that's always the interesting point of, okay, securing housing, and then also, but in what price level? Is it affordable? Is it something that you can support being in long term? And then looking further into affordable housing, specifically within Cornwall, what the state does want within our plan is that we discuss the history of affordable housing, and also we have an understanding of the stock that we have now that can satisfy the state definition of affordable housing. So this is the data that the state currently has for Cornwall. So 34 affordable units, which equates to about 3%. So 830G is the state mandate that purports that towns get to that 10%. So that's just to keep that in mind. So this is on that affordable housing appeals list, which is what the state recognized based on that definition. And the definition is here. We'll touch upon it many times over the course of this study, because satisfying that definition and keeping it in mind, it's technical. So thinking through what's satisfying the state requirement and then also other housing options. So that's the climate that we're in. So that's the existing housing that's here in Cornwall that qualifies, recognized by the state per the definition as affordable housing. So we're at about 34 units. And then just another point of that is just every year or so, Litchfield County comes out with this housing wage, which is the hourly rate that gets calculated that basically purports that it's the amount of money that you would need to be making to ensure that your housing is affordable. So that's at about $22. And then this table beneath it just throws out the housing cost limits based upon 80% of the area median income. So my takeaway from kind of these two numbers is just that we're in an expensive area for housing. And this, just so everyone knows, this is the rent, the mortgage, and the utilities. So all of that goes into the computation of these numbers. And that's from Connecticut CERC, so the Economic Resource Town Profiles. So this, I think, might actually be a little bit behind the times, this slide. This was the home family sales. This was pulled from census data, but there have been some updates. So some bullet points on the bottom are more recent, which is just the increase of prices of homes. An article was sent around, Real Estate Bonanza. That's made it to our webpage if anyone wants to read a recent article that was put out about housing in the area. And, as a result of the COVID pandemic, really seeing an increase of moves into Litchfield County and what's that doing for pricing and availability. I think we've all seen it in some way, shape, or form, but just looking at really the extremely large price increase in housing across the region, and in particular in Cornwall. So from all of this is sort of just generalizations that are being made, pulling from these data points and looking it through, just thinking through what type of housing that we do have is available. I think it's important to think through options for first-time home buyers, renters, and then also seniors. So these are just some generalizations. And then just another data point, I was looking for rental housing just to prepare for this presentation. And I did a few quick searches. Nothing's available, no surprise there, but nothing's available. And if so, it's very limited. So it's like a few months out of the year. And then they're at these price points like 6,500 per month or 7,500 per month. So just every once in a while, I'll pull up Airbnb, Google, and look for Zillow, any availability, be it to buy a home, to rent a home, or to stay overnight in town. So just to kind of pull some of those numbers, it's been interesting. And then just to touch upon senior housing as well, just given the demographic numbers that we're looking at, it looks like the demands for senior housing will only grow. We did reach out. I do know David Berto touch base on some waiting lists, and he said the waiting list in the current senior housing at Bonnie Brook is actually over a 2-year wait right now. So just thinking through that demand and how that could in turn reflect within our plan. So just to end on the housing goals, I covered a lot of information in a short period of time, just to bring us back to the housing goals of the Plan of Conservation and Development, and then to think through what the picture of our current housing situation, where that will push us with this housing plan. So I'll stop sharing my screen so we can look at everyone. Sorry, I ran through things really quickly. Does anyone have any questions? Gordon.
Yeah, Janelle, do you know when the 2020 census information will come out? Because I think things, I mean, I know, for example, the school population has gone up, but how long that's going to last. But we know we're in a pretty much different world at this point. And because the 2020 census, I think a lot of that information was gathered, after COVID had started, at least. Do you have any idea when we'll get more recent numbers?
Yeah, so I've been looking at what the Partnership for Strong Communities has come out with. They came out with that housing profile for the towns. 2020 is the year that they note. So I was looking at those numbers in preparation for making this data presentation, just to see if those trends are continuing, and just trying to pull the most recent numbers that I can. The reason why we use those 2014 to 2018 numbers is because with 2020, it's the American Community Survey. So it's less, what they're coming out with is less robust as far as all of the numbers go. So it's much more of a limited snapshot of the data, if that makes sense. Anna?
To answer Gordon's question, it'll be over a year.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of data crunching that has to go on. I wanted to ask if we could clarify about the law, because most of the time when it's discussed, there seems to be an underlying assumption that the state is telling every town in Connecticut that they must achieve 10% affordable housing. but that's not really, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, Janelle, but that's not really what the law says. What it says is until you achieve that 10%, a developer can't buy land in Cornwall and apply to the Planning and Zoning Commission to build a large affordable housing development. The Planning and Zoning Commission may deny that application on the basis of our current zoning regs. The developer then, what the law says is that the developer then turns around and sues in Superior Court. The law says that the judge has to vote in favor of the developer. In other words, towns' zoning regulations may be overridden if the town has not yet achieved 10%. Is that accurate?
So, yeah, sure. So just to expand on that, so there's two things working at the same time here, 830G and 830J. 830G is the 10% mandate that came to play way back when, 1980s, 1985, 86, I believe it was adopted. That's still in place. So that is a vulnerability of towns that do not make the affordable housing appeals list, that have less than the 10%, so they're more vulnerable to affordable housing applications. That said, if a developer were to purchase land, come before the P&Z, propose an out of scale, out of place, out of et cetera type of proposal, the P&Z, their standards for approval get flipped on their head. So the regulations, the way that they're written, the burden of proof becomes on the Planning and Zoning Commission, not the applicant, to prove that the application would be detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. So that's where the regulations actually sort of get subverted in this 830G mechanism that the state has put in for that 10% mandate. Does that make sense?
So what does 830J say?
So 830J says that this is new as of 2017. All towns within the state have to adopt an affordable housing plan that's good for 5 years. So my thought process behind this is that a lot of what the state was seeing is the towns are not achieving this 10% goal. And the state is now putting in another mandate with a plan, the blueprint for eventually getting to this 10% goal. The state is also in the understanding that towns, much like Cornwall, much like where we are in rural Connecticut, that 10% just based upon building houses and the cadence of development, it's a long-term goal. So for example, Cornwall has like 1,000 housing units. 10% of that would be 100 to build 100 new units at any rate, market affordable. That's just a boom for us, a housing boom. And when you look at available land, steep slopes, wetlands, all these planning constraints, it's really not a feasible goal. So I feel like through the affordable housing plan, the state is pushing towns to practically look at where they can create more housing options for its residents, recognizing that there is a housing crisis, not just in Connecticut, but pretty much nationwide. Does that help? Great. Maggie. You're
There we
well,
go.
there you go.
Yeah, I got it. Practically speaking, as you were, G has not seemed such a horrible threat in Cornwall for the reasons you just mentioned. It's so hard to find land. And it's also extremely hard for a developer to recoup his costs by building the kind of development he would have to build in order to bring that into play, 10% affordability or whatever. And our feeling has always sort of been, if you can do it, great, bring it on. You know, that's 4 more units of affordable housing that somebody else has beat themselves into a pulp to finance and maintain. So I don't think it's a horrible threat for Cornwall. And I like the idea that J is just to make us more realistic. Bye.
Gordon?
Yeah, just one other clarification. So we're not, as part of this planning process too, we're not just talking about government subsidized housing. We're talking about a whole range of housing options, rental, young people, senior housing, whatever. So we can do things that might not fit the state's definition, but would help us achieve our goal of having more housing options open for Cornwall people. So we can go beyond their definition in our work. I think it's important to remember that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's correct. And despite the fact that we're mandated to do this, it is a good opportunity for the town to really look at the housing goals and to really think through, okay, how do we get there? How do we get to where we want to be, keeping in mind that the plan's a 5-year plan. So, I mean, things take time, just even like getting a zoning regulation through, that can take months of planning and process and just making sure that we get to where we want to be. So it's setting towns up to really think through strategies. There has to be affordable housing by the state definition within the plan, but that doesn't mean that there can't be other options. In speaking with Department of Housing, they were very reasonable and very open and actually encouraging of creative ideas, because housing needs to be across a whole diverse spectrum of incomes and needs, and renters and ownership and seniors and young people. So they were very much aware of that situation, which was encouraging.
Janelle,
Anything?
Janelle,
Yeah,
this is Joanne. May I ask a question?
yeah.
I guess this would be for Maggie. When you were showing the slides, you talked about the 34 units and 10 being at Bonnybrook, 18 in Coogan, and that's 28, which would leave 6, you said, around town. But I think there are, I don't know, 11 or more parcel houses that have been built by Cornwall Housing Corporation. Why are they not counted as affordable?
I'd love to take this too, but Maggie, it's all you. If you, no, you're fine. Thanks for that, Joanne.
There I go.
Yeah.
Joanne, the reason is that the income limits for the parcel program houses used to be fixed at 80% of county median, which is what's required to count as capital A affordable housing. But early on in the program, we started having owners who were getting into trouble because homeownership is just a lot more expensive and taxing than renting. And so we bounced the income limits up to 100% of county median, which is still low compared to how people actually earn in the county. And that's why they don't count. However, I did notice from something that we looked at the regional level that there is a bill pending that talks about maybe being able to count naturally occurring affordable housing. And I don't know what that means, but it sounds like righteous renters or something like the parcel program being able to be counted in those totals.
Yeah.
I don't know that it will bring us into the fold, but it could.
My understanding of that naturally occurring is just the state is starting to think through some of the more flexible, broader concepts. What comes to mind is accessory apartments. So by nature,
Exactly.
they tend to be smaller, less expensive, and an option for renters. So they're thinking through
Unless there's 646 a night.
Dear
Yes.
God.
Yes, and from the conversation I've had, the state is starting to realize the fact that property owner would not be inclined to deed restrict that just because of all that deed restriction entails. So that's my understanding of what could qualify for naturally occurring affordable housing.
That would help us a lot.
Any other member of the committee that wants to add something or talk about data or has any questions or thinks something was incorrect or doesn't think something that I can examine further, let me know.
Janelle, there was on your slide about major employers. I think that Trinity Retreat Center has become the largest employer in town. Or whatever, and the Cornwall Electric, of course, is no longer in town.
Hmm.
And you might, I mean, Gordon may know the answer about Camp Mohawk. I think they consider themselves a significant employer too, although I'm not sure whether it's year-round. Gordon, I think, knows the answer to that. And I also have a question for Janet, since the posting that I made generated a lot of questions about something she mentioned at your last meeting, which was apparently some company or organization called Vessel. Will she please clarify what that is?
Sure, I was just going to make sure that all the members of the committee added something, and then we'll get to public comment, but we can by all means shuffle into public comment. We'll shuffle into public comment if we're ready for that. So, Joanne, if you don't mind restating your question, maybe?
I'd like to add, I said several questions came back to me personally about would I elaborate on Vessel? And I said I couldn't. I said I was only referring to Janet's reason for, her stated reason for joining your committee. And so could she tell us what Vessel is and what her connection is?
What does that mean?
So,
All right, so first of all, as EDC chair, one of the main goals that we have is to help bring, somebody needs to mute themselves.
Yeah, 1 sec, I'm trying to figure it out who it is.
Thank you. So, as there's no benefit to me personally with Vessel. One of my clients simply knew the executives of that company. That company is a group of altruistic people who have experience in building attainable housing. They were interested in finding a rural setting. And as EDC chair, it made sense to make that introduction. So it's as simple as that. And if anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. It's kind of odd to have these questions posted in public forum as opposed to asking, perhaps, getting a hold of the person you have a question of directly. And then it just makes it look like something's being kept secret, which is not the case. And I would say 98% of the time, 99.9% of the time. In this case, there's nothing to see here. Does that answer your question? I'll take that as a yes.
I'm sorry, I was just unmuting myself. You said it's an altruistic group. Is it a nonprofit? You said it was your motivation for joining the committee. So, I know as you said, you're on quite a few different committees, so this must be a very high priority, or you must think they can do. And what are they looking for in terms of a rural setting for what? Is this the $2.5 million project?
No, it's nothing like that. They basically were trying to find, so they typically, and I'm speaking out of school, to be honest, because I do not represent Vessel. I don't, I've had quite a few conversations with them, but it's been, on an informal basis. So anything that I'm saying is my own opinion. It does not If I misrepresent Vessel in any way, I will apologize in advance. I'm just simply taking from what I know. So these folks they were successful people in real estate in New York City, and they wanted to do something to give back because they have the know-how and the ability to do so. So they started crafting attainable housing units. So what they're trying to do is create housing that is responsible for the environment, affordable for people to live in, and are easy to install and remove if need be, but would be a lower cost way to bring housing to a community. They've done this very successfully in an urban setting because of the situation in rural towns needing to have affordable housing or attainable housing. They started exploring that. And because they said, they started reaching out to their contacts. One of my clients knows the CEO of this company and said, if you're looking for rural contacts, I know the chair of the EDC in a rural town. So I'd like to make that connection. So they are asking nothing from us. They are looking for an opportunity to partner with the town and provide attainable housing that's beautiful, that is responsible, and that would be affordable for the people who want to use that.
Thank you.
Certainly. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to call me, 0038.
So Janelle, then my other question.
Joanne, I was going to just ask the greater public if they had any comments, and then we'll circle back.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any other member of the public that wishes to speak at this point in time? If you don't have the raise your hand button and you wish to ask a question in chat, feel free to do that too.
Janelle, it's Nancy Berry.
Hi there.
Hi, Janelle. I have a question, and you touched on it just a moment ago about private housing that individuals in the town rent out a space. Either they've made an apartment in their home or they have a home which they rent, and it is, for lack of a better word, it's in a price point that workforce can afford. So do we have any inventory of these types of housing? I think it would be helpful if the state is going to maybe consider this.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question because I really think the inventory of so many things, so many land use things are so important, especially when it comes to what could potentially qualify for the state. Last I checked with the zoning official, I believe, and I don't want to misquote because there's so many numbers flying around, I think, and Gordon, correct me if I'm wrong, as far as efficiency units go in town, I think at one point, I don't even want to state the number, but I was asking to get a sense of those numbers. But I really think in moving forward to truly have, okay, we have 25 efficiency units, and for example, how many do we want to get to provide another means for housing? So I think figuring out our starting point is definitely a really important part of the metrics that can go into where we want to go. So I'm glad you raised that question. And our next meeting is an assessment of our current zoning regulations, and what I want to bring to the table, and I'm glad you prompted me to do my homework, is to ask these questions to get the town records of how many efficiency units there are in town so that we know of like where we could potentially go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public I'm trying to scan everybody.
I just want to say hello to everybody. So I'm Beth O'Donnell. I own property on Cogswell Road. I'm an affordable housing professional and very interested in what's going on in Cornwall. So to the extent, thank you for allowing me to observe, and to the extent I can provide any expertise or guidance as you move along this journey, I'm happy to.
Great.
Yeah, Beth, we're meeting every month at this time, so it's great to see you and welcome aboard. We can all use good ideas. So
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
And
Thanks,
just
Laura.
one, yeah, just one thing, Janelle, be good just to track how many accessory apartments have been built in the last 10 years. Because I know it's a significant number. It's probably more, it's probably a bigger number than houses themselves. So again, that seems to be a popular trend that should be encouraged, expanded, or whatever, because it really meets our goals. And it would be good just to see what the data is on that, because I think that shows, you know, an adaptation of housing to the landscape.
Yeah, great. So I will come with hopefully a good count of that for when we're looking at what zoning we have in place now for next meeting. Anyone else that I missed? I'm trying to scan faces. If not, Joanne, we'll go back.
I have a question.
Sorry, Caroline.
It's Carolyn. Sorry, I didn't have my face on. Yeah, that's interesting about the accessory apartments that Gordon raised, because I noticed in the statute regarding the 10% that if you have a certain number of accessory apartments, I think that can also count towards it. And I noticed on an affordable housing meeting with the COG that in Roxbury, they're doing, that's kind of the way that they're dealing with this. They're getting at a lot of this affordable housing through accessory apartments. And maybe I was wondering if you could speak about that. Maybe we could get some information from what they're doing in Roxbury.
Yeah, sure. So I'll speak to what I know. My understanding and what I do know, there's a lot of land use bills on the legislative session that's going on right now. So a lot of much similar to the idea that Maggie talked about naturally occurring affordable housing. There's a lot of conversation around housing right now. So time will tell what gets passed through. As far as accessory apartments counting currently towards affordable housing, they don't, not yet. So cross our fingers. But and as far as what Roxbury is doing, I recently did their referral. So they proposed the change that you could have up to 2 affordable housing units on your property. And I think one goes, and I would have to reference their exact text, but from my understanding of what it said, so they made the process a little bit easier. So it would go through, most towns, it goes through a special permit process. It's my understanding that it would go through the administrative process, the 1 unit. So your first accessory apartment would go through your zoning administrator as a zoning permit application. And then owner occupancy is a requirement, but then if you were to have 2, you'd go through the special permitting process. I'll have to verify that I'm getting you what's correct, but it's my understanding that they might be going to public hearing on that soon. So I don't know if that proposal was pushed through, but it's definitely my understanding that they're making proposals that would make having efficiency units in town a lot easier, and potentially even allowing for 2 on 1 single lot in addition to the primary residence. So that was actually the first time I've ever seen in the region a proposal of potentially having 2 accessory apartments.
Okay.
And I can, if you want, I can try to get that exact text and the result of their public hearing, if it did get passed or not.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And just to clarify, I was referring to that 10% level that we'd have to get, you know, in terms of that, that lawsuit type of thing from an affordable housing developer. It appears that if I read it correctly, that even if you have accessory apartments, they may count towards that. So that would be an interesting thing to look into. That
not yet. The statute's written currently. The way that you could get there is if you were to deed restrict it and write that into your deed.
Oh, okay.
But,
thank you. Okay, I get
yeah,
it.
Sure. That's just as written as today.
Okay, and then I just have 2 quick more questions. One is and this is for Gordon too, is it possible to add a new member such as Beth O'Donnell to the committee? If is the number of members fixed to be added? And then my second question is I'd love to hear from Heather Deneen about kind of her perspective on this in terms of what we can do to help people with this affordable housing issue more generally too. That's all.
Okay. And just for a little housekeeping note, so all of the members of the committee, if there's ever a situation where during public comment period, if someone wants to ask you a question directly, always feel free. If you want to work through me just as facilitator, don't feel put on the spot if there's more research that needs to be done or anything. But just know that, you know, that's there as an option, just to kind of, I don't want, you know, your lovely volunteers with your time to feel like, you know, all these questions ready for anything. So just as a side, same, you know, Janet, with the just conversation that went on before. So Heather, if you feel like taking it.
Yeah. I mean, I can just give some general information. You know, I've put out some information this morning just about access and people accessing the food pantry and the difference in numbers from last year to this year. And I think that overall that trend is the same for all aspects of social services. So what we're seeing right now is a major uptick in people needing support in a variety of ways. And so there's lots of ways that social services can help support people. I start typically with the biggest pot of money, which would be more of your federal funds, then go to state funds, and then more regional, including funds that are managed at the COG through Neighbor to Neighbor, and then Berkshire to Conic and others, and then down to the Cornwall Food and Fuel Fund. So in terms of housing, we do see a number of requests for support with rent. I think I also see a number of people who are looking for housing in the area that's, you know, more affordable for them and their budget, given their current financial situation. One of the major barriers right now that I see to that is lack of support in credit counseling. So people, even if you wanted to apply to live at Bonnybrook or live at Cougaman, you know, are often turned down because of poor credit. And many of the credit counseling agencies are no longer available. So finding a good resource for people to go to help get some support with their credit. And this is, you know, people who've grown up and lived in, have great connections to Cornwall for many years, are not able to access housing here because of that reason. So I think that's one of the big barriers that I'm seeing. In addition to that, are people who have moved here pretty recently and now have found themselves unemployed, and unemployment benefits have been very tricky to access. And so even though there is an eviction moratorium in place, that doesn't mean that landlords aren't starting the process, and that doesn't mean that the rent's not piling up and going to be due or is due. So we're definitely seeing those situations, but I mean, fortunately, we live in a very generous community. We've been able to help people patch things together at this point. I think the big concern will be when Eversource starts coming and saying that they're going to start shutting off power for non-payment, because I'm watching the bills and the balances go up in a big way right now. So people are probably allocating that money toward rent. And then when Eversource changes their policy, I think we're going to see a big shift in demand, even bigger than we are right now.
And just to add on that, as I was thinking through really looking at the housing maintenance costs, I was thinking through what we could potentially do as a group, and thinking this more, not just creation of housing and getting people into housing, but also how to keep them in adequate housing over time. And thinking through, I have seen small loans for home repair, which can really make all the difference of people having an adequate roof over their heads. So thinking through within this plan and this planning process, other mechanisms for housing options in town, including maintenance, because what you see is, especially, you know, all things like they require long-term thought and funneling of money. Everything costs money over time. So thinking through how we could create mechanisms for proposals like that into the plan. It just, I kept the cost of maintaining a home in Connecticut being stated at $17,000. That's a lot of money to just have aside in the bank for anyone to maintain their home, let alone even getting that home in the first place. So just thinking through that whole, how that's all intertwined. Anna. Oh, unmute.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about our seniors, and the fact that many of them are trying to continue to live in and maintain the homes in which they raise their families. And those homes are frequently old, big, expensive to maintain. And I wonder if anybody has ever asked our seniors whether they would want to move to a smaller, more modern setting, more modern home, whether they could be asked to give us an indication if that's something we should be pursuing in our planning. That's all.
For a second, Anna, I thought you were going to ask if seniors wanted a roommate. That's always an option.
You know, they have a good program in France like that.
I think that,
Sorry.
I think that that is a real hole in our housing stock is, and I know from personal experience that of people having to, leave town, not to go to a nursing home, but just to go to what's known as a small rental apartment or a condominium place. So people go to Kent or they go to Canaan, and we just don't have that here. And I think, again, that's different than Bonnybrook. This is market rate. This is not income based, but I think that's a real hole in our housing stock that all of us are going to be looking at some point. How, you grew up in this house and it's just not practical anymore. So that again is another thing where I think there's a big hole in our housing stock that we should consider.
This is Carolyn. I think there's an interesting program in France that's very successful where the people live together. Like there's some situation where they share or they have like an apartment within the house or something like that to help with the elderly. And then when the elderly person passes away, the house passes to that family. And it's been really wildly successful. So something, I don't know, I could send you more details on it, Janelle.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm going to get back to public comment. Joanne, did I circle back to you? I'm sorry.
I had one quick question for Gordon. May I ask it?
Yeah, I can barely hear you, but.
Okay, I have one quick question for Gordon. Gordon, I think you are a member of the board of directors of COST, the Council of Small Towns. And their director has talked about making the goal instead of 10%, 3 to 5% for smaller towns. Have you supported that as a board member of COST, and what do you think about it?
And I'm just going to interject really quick, just for the running of these meetings, just in the future, questions directed to anyone. I don't want anybody to feel compelled or feel like they really have to prepare themselves for these meetings other than myself. I put that burden on me as facilitator. So just for the purpose of public comment, just to know that it might not be the best avenue to directly target questions to people other than me, but just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think again, that's pretty far off our agenda of the Council of Small Town. But the housing issue is a statewide issue that different towns have different approaches. And certainly we as a town have done more for affordable housing in the housing mix than other places that have a 0 as opposed to a 3. So I think we're well ahead of some other places. And I am all in favor of what makes sense for Cornwall and not hung up on 10% or 5%. But I know as we said before, we can all come up with things that we should be doing that make sense for us locally. And I'm more concerned about doing that than I am about the specific numbers. And obviously, as Janelle said, going 10% is, doing 100 units when we're building one house a year of any type in Cornwall. It's not happening. So anyway, I don't want to be discouraged because we were one of the first towns to allow accessory apartments, which are now part of the landscape and have been great for people. So again, the advantage we have as a town is we do have a lot of ability to make our own rules and do things that we think make sense. And you can see over the recent time how these efforts have made a big difference in the town, and has made a difference in the school, maintaining the school population, maintaining a workforce. So again, we have things we can do, as I said about the, market rate elderly apartments make a lot of sense to me, and everybody knows land is scarce, but doesn't mean we can't try to do it in an organized way. And we still have a few more things on the agenda to get to as far as public stuff. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, maybe we can.
I'm going to shift back to the agenda. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just thinking through housing strategies and moving forward, I do want to take this opportunity now that we're at number 3 of our agenda to think through next steps. And given, you know, the greater public interest, really thinking through our public involvement, I propose that next meeting we get talking about strategies. So I'll come to the meeting with the landscape of the zoning regulations that are in place currently as they stand, and then we can start talking through potentially like where we can go. It doesn't need to all be pursuant to land use, so it can be beyond what the Planning and Zoning Commission can touch upon. But I think starting to think through potential possible strategies to tackle some things, be it first-term home buyers, more rental stock, maintenance, seniors. And then I do want to talk through our public involvement and public outreach steps. I really hope that we can have an open house sort of opportunity in the springtime to discuss the strategies that we come up with before we move into any sort of proposal. So just wanted to get the sense from the committee members what that sort of overarching plan sounds like, what you think about that. Just more ways. There's so much to housing. There's a lot of things that can either get just lost, like affordable housing. The definition in and of itself is really meaty. So I think the more opportunity that we have to put our proposals out there and have an open discussion, the better. So thinking through working that into our workload, I just wanted to bring that up now before we get working any harder. Yeah, I do see Hector. Just unmute if you can. There you go. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, hi Janelle.
Hi.
I have very good presentation today. I wonder if I can urge you to make sure that everybody on your committee, not to mention those like me that are just observers, are having a look at the Planning Affordable Housing in Connecticut brochure.
Thank you.
Some 30 pages or so that the state has just put out, and I think it was in December, and make it a homework assignment for your next meeting.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. That was sent around to the group when we first started. Please revisit that, especially the pages that talk about public outreach. I think thinking through our options and how we want to go about it. There's so many different ways to communicate these days. So I think really being smart about the conversation that we're having, and then also making sure that we always kind of bring it back with the goals of what it is that we're doing, not to mention the mandate of what it is that we're doing. So thank you for that.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, Janelle, one thing we talked about was the Board of Selectmen did set its goals in December 2020. And one of our goals was to have a housing forum in the spring. It was supposed to be 2020, but we were sort of busy doing other things. So, I mean, the idea of having a forum in a couple months to outreach and really publicize it. And I appreciate the people dialing in here. It shows the interest of this issue, but it's it is a very broad issue, and there are people like the bank, National Iron Bank has approached me about doing a first-time home buyers fund, special fund. Apparently they have one like that in Norfolk that has worked. And again, so I think but I also want to have something concrete to say. So
Yeah.
if we can have a goal of having a housing forum and think of a couple of good topics, not just this planning thing, but, not to put people on the spot, but if somebody like Beth has some ideas from outside our little bubble, that'd be a good thing to hear too, because we're not, think we have all the answers. So again, have a couple of presentations and really have probably a 2-hour session on how housing in Cornwall, get some feedback, get some ideas. Because again, this whole process does have some timelines, but I think having community engagement is an important thing. We've seen in other places where this can be a hot button issue. I don't think we have any huge projects up our sleeves at this point, but we have plenty of opportunities to talk about.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of on my open agenda, is to have sort of a general community discussion when you feel we're ready, and when the committee feels we've gotten enough done on the early stages to do that. We can pull in a couple other aspects at the same time, as well as, Maggie, they've got given a couple of parcels to, go into depth, because there's a lot of new people in town that probably don't even know we have a parcel program. There may be some landowners in town that want to be as generous as Ginny Potter and give some land to the housing corporation. Maybe we pitch it right. You never know. This is a pretty amazing place. So again, I think there's a couple different aspects we could do. And again, make a few presentations and get some more stuff going. It'd be good.
Great. So Maggie, can we sign you up to present that on that day?
We can work.
Yeah. So that said, definitely thinking through an opportunity to present greater ideas to the public. I think next meeting will be a really good time to really talk through some strategies, be it creation of new housing, maintenance long-term, what we can do within our own framework of the zoning regulations that we have in place now. And then once we're mulling about with all these ideas, to bring those ideas to that greater discussion. I think if the committee thinks that that's kind of a good approach.
Also, this is Carolyn, just as part of, bringing everything to the table, would it be possible, I'm asking you, Janelle, so it goes through you. Would it be possible for Janet to provide some information about the vessel idea? It sounds interesting. And also then there's that 2.5 million project that the COG has submitted to the Department of Housing for the 2.5 million Cornwall Housing Corporation project. So if there could be some information provided about that 2.5 million project. I don't know if that's something that Maggie Cooley submitted to you that was then submitted to the DEOH, but I think it would be great if we could have as much information as possible about these potential pending projects.
Yeah, so I'm just to jump in really quickly, I'm not aware of a $2.5 million project through the COG. I work for the COG, I'm not aware of that. I'd be happy to look in and try to find more information about that. But again, just during these housing meetings, I really want to funnel our discussion so we're not put on the spot answering these questions. So I'll do the research that I need to do on that end. I'm not familiar with that, and I can see what I can look for. But furthermore, I lost my other train of thought, what I was trying to say. Oh, vessel. Yeah. So I do want to make sure that we create a forum for open discussion, especially about the affordable housing plan and what we're thinking as far as the committee will put forth for endorsement and approval. I really want to be cautious about potential projects because the Planning and Zoning Commission, I do not want to compromise any members. We do have some members on the Planning and Zoning Commission. We have the chair here. I don't want to compromise them with any sort of prejudgment situation. So we'll have to navigate that really cautiously, just keeping in mind the role and the responsibility of the Planning and Zoning Commission and their involvement with this group as well.
That number that Caroline mentioned was, I think if you look on the paper where it appears, it's like a far, far distant projection. We were trying to give the Department of Housing a timeline about what kinds of money the Northwest Corner could be requesting from them. And the amount of money for Cornwall is probably linked to what we're going to need in the future to keep Cougarman in good nick or Bonnybrook. It's not attached to a particular project.
Okay, great.
Pie in the sky.
Thanks for clarifying. I have no idea where that number came from. That's that's maintenance then, is my understanding. Mhm.
Could be anything, but it isn't anything in particular.
Great, thanks for clarifying. I know Heather, you wanted to touch upon a resource.
Oh, I was just going to mention that I'm only going for the first time tomorrow, so was just invited, but my understanding is a group of social service, primarily focused professionals in the area have a meeting tomorrow. I'm happy to share back more information after I get it regarding creating or talking about creating a village to village network type resource in Northwest Connecticut. So I'm happy to bring that information back to the next meeting.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And just another, so in thinking through, just a little announcement, the Northwest Hills COG, they are hosting a webinar series on affordable housing. I believe the next one is this week. Let me double check. It's the 24th. And if anyone wants to hear more information, I can send out a flyer. I'll put my email into the chat to everyone, to those that don't have it, if you do want to listen in. I know there are a few attendees from this committee that were there the last time. There's just a lot of discussions around affordable housing, different things that might interest you. Just wanted to mention that that's taking place. But other than that, it sounds like I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's about 5:15. So our next meeting will be in a month's time. And I will, so it looks like that puts us to March 22nd at 4 o'clock. And so I'll send out all the materials. We'll be discussing our zoning framework that we have right now in town, the current regulations, and then thinking through how to get to those plan of conservation development goals, and then also adding more meat to the bones of strategies, other strategies. So it will be a lot of brainstorming, less slides, a lot of brainstorming of kind of what mechanisms we can put forth in the plan. No decision making, just a brainstorming session. And then we'll bring some of those ideas to the greater conversation at a housing forum in the spring. Any member of the committee have anything to add? Great. No. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time. Reach out if you have questions or anything, and we'll see everyone in a month.
Okay, thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.